That Thanksgiving, my husband and I were speeding down the highway, eager to get to my grandfather's house for dinner, when a bomb cyclone hit, with wind howling like a hurricane, ready to tear the road apart. But the most terrifying thing that night wasn't the storm. It came from a phone call. Jennifer, my husband's best friend, was screaming, gasping into the microphone. "Magnus, I'm going into labor!" Magnus didn't take even 3 seconds. He slammed the brakes, threw me out of the car, and turned back to rush his mistress to the hospital. He left me to die in the dark without a shred of mercy. But when he came back, what he saw would etch itself into his memory for the rest of his life. The gentle woman he once knew had been reborn, returned cold, proud, and carrying a truth that would drag him and his lover into a lifetime of nightmares. My name is Adeline Hayes, 35 years old, a quiet and gentle woman working at a charitable veterinary clinic in Seattle. My husband's family has always looked down on me, for my modest background, for a job they deemed unworthy of someone married to Magnus Hayes, a CEO in the defense tech industry. For the past 5 years, I've never revealed my true identity. The only granddaughter of Jonathan Vance, retired Marine Corps colonel, real estate tycoon, and owner of dozens of housing complexes for retired servicemen. On the night before Thanksgiving, as I set the chicken stew on the table, I made myself very clear to Magnus. We've spent Thanksgiving dinner with your parents 5 years in a row, so this year, we're going to Tacoma to have Thanksgiving dinner with my grandfather, Jonathan. He paused for a moment, gripping the knife tighter, unaccustomed to hearing me make a decision. He gave the usual excuses: traffic, emergency meetings, quarter-end work. But I just looked him in the eye and repeated, "Tomorrow, we're going." Eventually, he gave a reluctant nod. I thought if he would just go, we might still have a chance. But the next afternoon, Magnus came home nearly 40 minutes late, his coat reeking of a perfume I'd never worn. His expression strange, like he'd just lived through something he couldn't, or wouldn't, explain. I asked only, "Are you ready?" He said, "Yeah, let's go," but couldn't meet my eyes for more than 2 seconds. We left Seattle under a sky darkening to leaden gray. On the radio, they kept warning of a bomb cyclone, wind gusts up to 74 miles per hour, hurricane-force gusts. Rain lashed the windshield like cold fists clawing at the car. I stared at the I-5 ahead, slick and glistening. Headlights blurred through a curtain of white rain that looked like smoke. Magnus was different. The entire drive, his eyes were on his phone, the glow of the screen lighting up his face more than the streetlights ever could. He chuckled softly a few times, typed constantly, then tilted the screen away when he noticed me glance over. It wasn't the first time he'd been distracted behind the wheel, but that night, with weather alerts blaring, wind slamming against the car like it was trying to peel the metal off, the restlessness in him chilled me more than the freezing air outside. I meant to tell him then, what I had kept hidden for years, that Jonathan wasn't just the old man in Tacoma, as Magnus always half-listened and dismissed, but the man behind one of the largest real estate empires on the West Coast. That I was his heir, that our lives would change after this Thanksgiving dinner. But I didn't get the chance. Magnus's phone rang. A name lit up on the screen. Jennifer, the beauty TikToker with 2 million followers, the one he always called just a friend. He picked up immediately, and in the 10 seconds that followed, between the pounding rain and the howling wind, my marriage took a turn I never could have imagined. On the other end of the line was chaos, ragged breathing, wind battering the microphone, and then Jennifer's voice burst through like a cry for help. "Magnus, my stomach hurts. I think I'm going into labor." Magnus froze like someone had yanked a cord tight. "Where are you? Are you alone? Don't be scared. I'm coming back." He spoke without thinking, already reaching for the wheel to turn the car around, while I was still trying to convince myself I must have misheard. I placed a hand on the dashboard, my voice calm to the point of terrifying. "Magnus, she can call the baby's father, or call 911. We are going to see my grandfather." He whipped around to look at me, not with the eyes of a husband, but of a man cornered. And then, under the downpour, hammering the roof like 100 fists, he said the words that made my whole body go numb. "Adeline, the baby is mine!" My world fell silent. The sounds outside dissolved into a white fog. I could no longer hear the wind, nor the honking horns, only the sound of my own heartbeat struggling to move within a chest that was tightening by the second. Magnus yanked the steering wheel mid-highway on I-5, despite the road slick with rain and slush. The Mercedes skidded sideways, tires screaming in the cold water. Horns blared from behind, headlights slicing into the cabin like gleaming blades. A strong gust hit, 74 miles per hour, hurricane force, slamming into the side of the car and tilting it. Instinctively, I grabbed the handrail, but a sudden jolt flung the bracelet Jonathan had given me off my wrist. It fell to the floor with a faint metallic clink, but to me, it sounded like something far more vital had just shattered. Magnus barely noticed. He kept mumbling Jennifer's name, knuckles white on the wheel, his breathing broken and erratic. And then, as if I were just an obstacle standing between him and her, he slammed on the brakes. The car screeched to the icy shoulder. The hazard lights blinked into the white rain. The passenger door flung open, and a blast of freezing wind struck me in the face, so sharp it stung my eyes. Magnus shouted, his voice cracking in the storm, "Get out! Walk to Tacoma!" I looked at him, the man I once trusted, once held hands with down the wedding aisle, now throwing me out into one of the cruelest Thanksgiving storms Washington had ever seen. And in that moment, I knew the marriage was over. Not with tears, but with the sound of wind howling through the open door before me. Before I could grab anything, Magnus reached across me, yanked my small suitcase from the back seat, and hurled it onto the road as if it were trash. That one motion made my whole body tremble. Not from cold, but from a bare cruelty I never thought him capable of. Then he grabbed my arm and yanked me out of the car, still flashing its hazard lights. My shoes slipped on the slushy I-5 pavement. My knee slammed into the freezing asphalt, but Magnus no longer cared. He just wanted me out of his car as fast as possible, as if I were an obstacle in his path to Jennifer. The moment my feet hit the ground, the wind slapped my face so hard it felt like a blow. It was strong enough to tilt the car, nearly 120 kilometers per hour. Snow pelted my skin in stinging bursts, each flake like a needle. Within seconds, my coat was dusted white, my hair whipped around violently, the wind tugging hard enough that I nearly toppled backward. Magnus didn't look at me again. He climbed back into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. A single click of the electric lock. A tiny sound, but enough to sever what little remained between us. And then, he drove away. The red taillights of the Mercedes faded into the white curtain of snow, leaving me alone on Thanksgiving night. Alone. On the I-5 highway, with temperatures below freezing and wind strong enough to rip traffic signs from the ground. I stood there, unmoving for several seconds, until I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. I searched my jacket, my jeans, the lining of my coat. Nothing but a soaked tissue. A chill shot down my spine as memory kicked in. I'd left the phone on the passenger seat, right next to Magnus. He was gone, taking with him the one thing that could have saved me. The cold seeped into my legs, making my calves cramp. My breath came out in heavy fog, gusting like smoke in front of me. I bit my lip until it bled, trying to hold back the shaking. The wind roared, burning my eyes until I had to squint. Maybe. This is the fear people dread most. Not of dying, but of realizing someone chose to abandon you. As I staggered backward, pressing close to the guardrail for shelter, a thought flashed through me. Maybe I'll die before I ever see Jonathan again. The thought was ice cold and hurt like someone had clenched my heart with both hands. But just then, as my hand touched the metal rail, a sharp metallic sound startled me. I looked down at my left wrist. Apple Watch. I'd worn it since morning to track steps at the clinic, and this was one of the rare days I hadn't taken it off. My fingers were trembling, nearly frozen stiff, but I still pressed and held the side button. The screen lit up, foggy from steam and snow, but I could still see the familiar name appear on the quick call interface. Grandpa Jonathan. I tapped it. The connection was slow, because of the storm, the ice, because I was standing in the middle of a highway. Then his voice came through, strong but so panicked I hardly recognized it. Adeline, where are you? What happened? I opened my mouth to answer, but my lips were stiff, shivering. And then I broke down. Not because of betrayal, not because I was abandoned, but because, for the first time in 5 years of marriage, someone was truly afraid of losing me. Standing in the middle of a blizzard on the highway, my tears mixed with the freezing rain, and I sobbed out loud. Grandpa, I don't know where I am. On the other end, Jonathan's voice turned hard, so hard that I felt cold just hearing it. Stay where you are. Don't move. I'm having my team triangulate your Apple Watch. Don't hang up. Don't go anywhere. I could only nod, even though he couldn't see me. 2 minutes later, he said something I never imagined I'd hear in real life. Adeline, stay calm. My team is on their way. I didn't know what on their way meant, until I saw 2 beams of white light sweep down onto the road from above, followed by the roar of rotor blades splitting the sky. At first, I thought it was rescue trucks, maybe state troopers. But no. The sound was too loud, too close, too powerful. Military helicopters. Within seconds, the entire stretch of I-5 lit up with high-powered floodlights from 2 descending Black Hawks, their blades whipping the snow into white cyclones. And then, behind me, came the heavy thrum of engines, the kind you don't hear from civilian vehicles. I turned around to see 4 armored black SUVs pulled into formation along the shoulder, red and blue lights flashing through the snow like a national rescue operation. The doors burst open at once, and a team of former Special Forces soldiers in storm gear, headsets on, stormed out, shouting through the cold, "Secure the principal!" Snow sprayed as they ran toward me, formed a windshield around me, wrapped thermal blankets around my shoulders, helped me stay upright. One knelt to eye level, checked my pupils, and asked, "Miss Adeline? We're here on Mr. Vance's orders. Are you injured?" I could barely respond, my lips numb from the cold, but I gave a faint nod. Just as they were preparing to load me into the first SUV, another beam of headlights cut through the distance, Magnus's car. He braked hard, skidding over the ice-slick pavement, jumped out, and ran toward us, shouting, "Adeline, your phone!" He froze. His whole body stiffened at the sight of the 4 armored SUVs, the 2 Blackhawks spinning down, and the team of elite operators surrounding me like I was someone untouchable. I'd never seen his face drain of color so fast. He took half a step back, lips dry, voice cracking like someone I didn't know. "Adeline." "Who are you?" I looked at him, not angry, not hurt, just the truth I'd stayed silent about for years. "You never cared enough to ask." The agent closed the SUV door behind me as I was guided into the back seat, wrapped in another thermal blanket. Jonathan was already inside, eyes red with worry, but his hand on my shoulder was so warm I almost cried again. The door closed, the armored engine hummed to life, and the convoy started moving. Outside, Magnus stood alone in the snowstorm, the helicopter spotlight sweeping over him like a bright, silent verdict. The rotors picked up again, and the 2 Blackhawks flew overhead, escorting us off the I-5. It all ended the moment I left that place. My 5-year marriage, with all its patience, hopes, and forgiveness, ended at the exact moment Magnus came back just to return my phone, only to finally see the truth about the woman he had never truly paid attention to. 30 minutes later, the convoy pulled into Scatter Creek Rest Area, and Jonathan and I were airlifted onto one of the Black Hawks, flown straight to the Vance family's high-security estate in San Francisco, with the speed and precision of a military operation. And I knew. I had just stepped out of my own private hell, and straight into the world I truly belonged to. When we landed on the rooftop helipad of the San Francisco estate, I was still shivering, more from cold than fear. Jonathan's people took me straight to the in-house medical level, a private clinic he'd built after a minor stroke at 70. They wrapped thermal blankets around me, removed my soaked shoes, replaced my socks, took my blood pressure, checked for hypothermia. An older nurse with a voice rough from too many emergencies placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You're safe now, honey. You're home." After a stabilizing injection, they guided me to the marble-tiled shower, where hot water poured down over me like it was washing away both snow and everything that had just happened. I stood against the wall, watching steam fog up the mirror, and for the first time since being pushed from the car, I let myself breathe deeply, without fear the wind would steal that breath away. When I stepped out in a clean, cotton-scented robe, Jonathan was already waiting on the sofa, legs braced on a polished wooden cane, his face still flushed with worry. He stood slowly, but his hug was firm enough to make my entire body go slack. "I'm sorry, I should have pulled you out of that man's life sooner." I shook my head, not wanting to turn the night into another indictment. I simply said, "I'm here now, that's what matters." But Jonathan wasn't one to let things go. Once he was sure I was okay, he had me escorted to a guest suite while he headed straight for his office. The room full of books, maps, and framed photos with military figures and national leaders. As I passed the ajar door, I heard his voice, not slow and warm, but sharp and commanding, like a battlefield officer. He was on the phone with someone in Washington, dropping words like defense contract, cybersecurity module, compliance review. I'm no lawyer, but I grew up in his house long enough to know when Jonathan Vance activates old contacts at the Pentagon, this isn't personal anymore. It's a campaign. Hayes Industries, Magnus's company, held 3 defense contracts. I'd heard him brag about it at dinner. They supplied software and data platforms to new military projects. And with the right call, to the right person, Jonathan could have those contracts scrutinized more than any deal this year. I heard him mention the Inspector General's office, audits of strategic consulting, and intermediary costs, what regular people call bribes. When the IRS gets looped in, every account, property, and asset can be frozen for review. Sitting in a lounge near the kitchen, I was handed a cup of cinnamon honey tea. I wrapped both hands around it, letting the heat seep into my numb palms. Somewhere, behind thick estate walls, the oversight machine had begun. One call, one classified email at a time. I didn't know the details, but I knew the playbook. Once there's a whiff of shady spending in defense contracts, they dig through every financial report, every invoice, every client dinner. If they find a single vague consulting fund or shell company, it won't just be the DoD involved. The IRS will come too. I sat there, fingers on a hot cup, eyes unfocused, not feeling vengeful, not sad, just empty. Like my body had just undergone surgery, and someone had cut out a tumor that had lived inside me for years. Jonathan came in, closing the door behind him. He didn't sit down right away, just stood at the window staring at the rain-soaked lawn. Then he turned to me, voice old but razor-sharp. "I've initiated the audit on Hayes Industries, but there's one more thing I need to get to the bottom of." He placed a slim file on the coffee table. Screenshots, paparazzi photos, clipped articles his team had gathered in mere hours. "I don't just want to know he cheated," he said. "I want to know how long it's been going on, and what else you haven't seen." I looked at the photo of Jennifer smiling with her pregnant belly under studio lights, and it struck me. Not because she was special, but because I had once believed I wasn't worth choosing. Jonathan took out his phone, his hand now perfectly steady. "Head OB at St. Lucia's, Seattle," he said, like recalling a file from memory. "Old friend, and coincidentally, the doctor she's been seeing." He dialed, lifted the phone to his ear, and with the voice he once used to command fleets, he said, "Maria, it's Jonathan. I need to review a patient file. Her name is Jennifer." The moment he finished speaking, a faint sigh came through the other end of the line, the kind of sigh only doctors make, those used to keeping secrets, but also used to the way Jonathan Vance asks for things. Maria asked him to wait a few minutes while she pulled up internal data. Then the wall-mounted TV flickered on, The screen divided into 4 security feeds from St. Lucia Hospital. In the quiet sitting room, only the wind outside and the clicking of Maria's keyboard could be heard. "All right, I'm bringing it up now." The first frame appeared. Jennifer seated in the waiting area, hands on her belly, hair draped over her shoulder, and Magnus standing next to her. He bent down to tie her shoelaces. I recognized the coat he said he wore to a technical team meeting. "This was 3 weeks ago," Maria said. "And this—" She switched to the second frame. 2 weeks ago." Magnus appeared again. Again with Jennifer. Again tending to her like she was the most precious thing in his life. I didn't react. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just felt an emptiness, as if someone had opened a vast room inside me and swept everything out. Then, Maria said something that stilled the whole room. But 3 days ago was different. The footage shifted. Jennifer was in the waiting room again. But this time, it wasn't Magnus who appeared. It was another man. Taller, younger than Magnus by a few years, wearing a brown leather jacket, left hand holding a raincoat, right hand pulling Jennifer into his chest for warmth. And then, in front of everyone, he held her hand and kissed her forehead like a real husband. Jonathan furrowed his brow. I tilted my head slightly. Maria zoomed in. That's when we saw the wedding ring on the man's left hand. "That's Hunter," Maria explained. "Hospital records show he signed in as the legal guardian at her most recent visit." She paused. "Only someone extremely close, or the father of the baby, is allowed into the ultrasound room." I stared at that image for a few more seconds. The two of them sitting close, chatting warmly. Jennifer's hand on his cheek, his hand on her belly. The kind of intimacy Magnus never once gave me in 5 years of marriage. Jonathan set his teacup down with such force that the liquid splashed. "Magnus didn't just betray you," he said in a low voice. "He got played by her." I kept looking at the screen, and for the first time since Jennifer's phone call, my heart no longer hurt. It just felt cold, like a frozen lake surface. Maria then sent a PDF to the screen. The first line read, "Non-stress test, possible dual paternal markers detected." I understood immediately, signs of 2 possible fathers. Jennifer hadn't just slept with Magnus, she'd also slept with the ring-wearing man, Hunter. I exhaled, light as if releasing something heavy. "They deceived each other," I said, voice flat, like commenting on the weather. Jonathan leaned on his cane, his knuckles pale from pressure. He no longer looked like a worried grandfather. He looked like a man who once commanded a battalion in the field. His words came slow but sharp as steel. "The game has just begun." Jonathan's voice had the weight of cold metal clashing. I sat still in my chair, hands still cupped around the warm tea, and within minutes, I understood that when a man like him says the game is beginning, no one in it stands for long. That night alone, his phone rang nonstop. Calls from Washington, Arlington, Virginia, even old advisors from the Pentagon. I caught pieces of sentences through the Ager office door. Expedite the file. Recheck intermediary funding sources. I want every single consulting fund reviewed immediately. No one argued. No one delayed. They followed orders as if from a commander, not a nearly 80-year-old man. By the next morning, as I walked into the kitchen for hot water, the first internal bulletin had arrived. The Department of Defense was suspending its contract with Hayes Industries. I understood the language. Suspending meant they found a problem. Suspending also meant canceling. It just wouldn't rattle the markets as hard. A few hours later, the Navy issued a separate statement. Termination of the software weapons module development contract, the one Magnus had claimed would cement his place among national tech leaders. It all vanished in a statement barely half a page long. By noon, the IRS stepped in. A leaked email from a financial reporter hit Twitter. IRS opens comprehensive investigation into Hayes Industries and CEO Magnus Hayes. I read it with absolute calm. No pain, just truth finally realigning itself. That afternoon, Magnus's credit cards began getting shut down, followed by frozen personal and corporate accounts. A man who once used money as power now couldn't withdraw $20 from an ATM. His company's stock nosedived. Every time I glanced at the TV, a red ticker blazed across. Hayes Industries plunges 71%, then minus 90%, and by day's end, down to just 2% of its value. Seattle media howled like wolves smelling blood. They covered everything: shady consulting funds, dubious client expenses, shell contractors. The reporters Magnus used to dismiss, the ones he called cheap clickbait chasers, were now breaking stories so fast I knew they'd waited for this moment. Then the investors, those who had once shaken Magnus's hand under spotlighted conference stages while he wore $2,000 suits, began filing class action lawsuits. By the second evening, Seattle's biggest law firm formally took the case, estimating damages in the hundreds of millions. The final piece in the collapse hit me hardest. The Bellevue penthouse was seized. The home where I was once treated like an unwelcome guest. The place Magnus had called a symbol of success. The space I had scrubbed clean of spilled wine from his rowdy networking nights. They said he left with nothing but a backpack. Everything else was locked down for investigation and bank possession. I stood by the large window of Jonathan's estate, watching San Francisco's lights shimmer, and realized that this collapse, a man, a company, an entire life built on arrogance, had unraveled in 48 hours. Not because I retaliated, not because Jonathan sought revenge, but because everything he tried to bury finally surfaced. A week later, I received a message from an unknown number. "Adeline, I have no home to go back to." No tears, no excuses, just a sentence, bare, brief, and completely hollow. Magnus Hayes, the man who once said, "You can't live without me," was now sleeping under an awning near Highway 520, homeless exactly 1 week after he pushed me out of that car on I-5. I set the phone down on the coffee table, and for the first time in years, I felt a peace not because someone entered my life, but because a toxic presence had finally walked out. 3 nights later, as the fire in the hearth dwindled, Jonathan came in holding a thick yellow envelope. He placed it on the table like submitting evidence to a military tribunal. "Maria just sent this," he said, his voice low as distant thunder. "DNA results." I opened the envelope. The paper was still warm from the printer. The first line hit me square in the chest. Paternity probability, 0%. Magnus wasn't the father. Not 1%. Not even a chance. I didn't feel my heart clench or ache the way movies portray. That pain had died on I-5 beneath the blizzard and rain when Magnus left me. Now all that remained was a truth cold and sterile, like a piece of metal in my hand. I folded the paper slowly, took a deep breath. What will be, will be. Jonathan stared at me for a long moment before asking, "Do you want to press charges? I have enough evidence to take him to court for abuse, abandonment, and endangering your life." I shook my head, no bitterness in my voice. "No need, Grandpa. They're destroying each other." Jonathan nodded, his old eyes sharp with decades of military command. He left the room, and I remained alone with the flickering embers and a final truth now laid bare. I thought things with Jennifer had ended there, but life sometimes is more brutal than any verdict. Nearly a week later, as I was brewing tea, Jonathan called me into the living room. He played a video going viral online. "Maria sent this," he said. "You need to see it." In the video, Oregon snow was falling thick. At the entrance of a suburban house, Jennifer stood on the front steps, holding a bundled baby, pressing the doorbell repeatedly. Her voice cracked as she tried to speak through the door. "Hunter, please come out. I just want our son to know who his father is." The door opened. Not Hunter, but Layla, his legal wife. Her hair was wet, eyes red with exhaustion, hoodie soaked in rain. Layla didn't scream, didn't curse, didn't even ask a question. In her hand was a bucket of dirty water, probably from a garage mop. She stepped down one stair, looked at Jennifer for a few seconds, not with hatred, but with the gaze of someone too broken to hold on to any more emotion. And then she dumped the entire bucket of dirty water onto Jennifer, making her stumble back, nearly dropping the child. Jennifer's scream merged with the rainfall. A neighbor, witnessing the whole thing, recorded it silently, never intervening. After the splash, Layla spoke one sentence, clear, slow, and laced with pure devastation. "Don't ever come to my doorstep again." The door slammed shut. Jennifer stood there, drenched, staggering, her face streaked with dirty water and tears, the baby wailing in her arms. The video exploded on TikTok, 1.2 million views in under 2 hours. Comments flooded in like a storm. Any sympathy drowned beneath a wave of rage from followers who once watched Jennifer's nightly skincare livestreams. That night, her 2 million follower account vanished. No one knows if she deleted it or it was reported into oblivion. Jonathan looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I simply pressed pause, set the phone on the table, and said quietly, "There's nothing left to feel anymore, Grandpa." I stepped out onto the balcony for some air, but even the San Francisco wind that afternoon wasn't cold enough to make me shiver anymore. Every emotion I had for them had already burned out on that snowy night along I-5. Everything that happened afterward was simply the aftermath of a collapse they had brought upon themselves. In the days that followed, Seattle's press began to trickle in with small headlines, at first seeming unrelated, but gradually forming pieces of a final, inevitable puzzle. One article read, "Man showing signs of alcohol addiction found sleeping beneath an overpass near Highway 520. The photo was blurry, but the hunched figure in a tattered coat, greasy hair, and worn-out backpack was enough for me to recognize Magnus. A man who once slept on goose-down bedding in a Bellevue penthouse now lay on a damp cardboard mat next to windswept trash. The next day, more news came. Man arrested at Safeway for stealing bread and hot food. The image showed him handcuffed, head bowed, face flushed from alcohol, and I paused, not out of pity, but at the realization that a man who once wielded money as a weapon now traded his pride for a loaf of bread. Jennifer, meanwhile, suffered a different kind of fall. After the viral incident with Layla dumping dirty water on her, she returned with her newborn to her mother's home in Oregon, hoping for shelter. But there, Jennifer met only curses, shouts, even blows, from a mother and stepfather who had long seen her as a burden, a disgrace to the family. I wasn't surprised. People who build their lives on illusions often have nowhere to go once the curtain falls. Days later, a final report from Oregon made Jonathan exhale deeply. Hunter had officially filed for a restraining order against Jennifer and the child. He wanted to protect his family from the scandal, to erase every trace, to sever all ties. Jennifer lost both the father of her child and her last refuge at once, with no bottom to the fall. Then, on a cold evening in Portland, a volunteer distributing meals to the homeless described a scene beneath Morrison Bridge, where the Columbia River wind was so biting it made even the strong curl-up tight. 2 figures were caught fighting over a charity meal box, shouting, shoving, slipping, even wrestling each other to the damp concrete. The video went up on TikTok, yellow bridge lights reflecting off puddles beneath them. One was Magnus, disheveled, unshaven. The other was Jennifer, hair a mess, clothes soaked in grime. The baby was nowhere in sight, likely left with her mother. 2 people who once shared a bed. Once said, "I love you." Once betrayed me. Now reduced to scrapping over a meal no one would cling to. The video spread like wildfire. Tens of thousands of comments, most shocked, many mocking. Jonathan handed me his phone to show me, but I looked for just a moment before turning it off. My eyes no longer wished to hold any image of them. I set the phone down, walked toward the window overlooking the bay, and in that moment, I realized a simple truth. There was not a single feeling left in me for them. No sorrow, no rage, no regret. Only this: they had walked themselves into their own ending. I turned away from the window, believing the final pages of that old chapter had closed. But life has its own cruel way of showing you that a downfall isn't over when someone hits bottom. It ends when they still try to cling to something that no longer exists. The next morning, as I prepared to go to the Vance Global Holdings headquarters, the chauffeur opened the door of the sleek black Maybach. I stepped onto the steps of Montgomery Square, amid the wind and rush of San Francisco. And just then, a figure burst from the sidewalk, like someone fleeing cold, hunger, and perhaps even himself. Magnus. So gaunt I barely recognized him. His coat torn at the shoulders, his once slicked hair now matted, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, an alcohol-heavy breath steaming in the morning air. He stumbled and dropped to his knees right in front of me. No one moved. Not the guards, not the assistants, not even me. Magnus looked up, and in the very next second, slammed his head against the granite pavement. A crack rang out, sharp and dry, leaving a smear of blood on the stone. People gasped and backed away, some screaming. But Magnus didn't stop. He slammed his head again. Blood dripped down his nose, his lips splashing to the ground like heavy raindrops. "Adeline, I'm sorry. I'm sorry." His voice cracked like shattered glass. His whole body trembled, hands clinging to the fabric of my pants like a drowning man grabbing at rotten wood. "Give me one more chance, just one. I have no one left." I stood still, didn't flinch, didn't touch him. I just looked at him like a stranger, someone I used to know, once loved, but who no longer intersected with my life in any way. I waited until he raised his face, eyes swollen with desperation, wet with tears, and I said, slowly, clearly, every word as soft as it was merciless, "You don't deserve to be remembered by me." No yelling, no anger, no cruelty. Just a quiet ending, like shutting a door long rotten at the hinges. I turned and stepped back into the Maybach. The door closed, sealing me off from the raw wailing outside. But a new sound rose. The voices of onlookers live streaming, comments flooding the feed. "Is that Magnus Hayes?" "Oh my God, he's kneeling in the street." "He's bleeding, he's hitting his head." "Who is she? She's stunning. So calm." Within minutes, the video was trending. I glimpsed my assistant's phone, millions of views climbing by the second. Beside me in the back seat, Ethan, CFO of Vance Global Holdings, sat silently. He looked at me with no pity, no curiosity, only a quiet respect that a good man gives to a woman who has endured far too much. He asked nothing, offered no comment, just handed me a tissue. I took it, wiped the blood Magnus had left on my hand, then set the tissue aside. The car pulled away. Behind us, Magnus's screams were swallowed by traffic. And me. I felt a strange weightlessness, not because I was strong, but because, finally, I had stepped out of his shadow, forever. But the sky after the storm doesn't just appear on its own. It's built from days of quietly rebuilding a life, piece by piece, over the year following the moment Magnus knelt in the streets of San Francisco. I began with what had always nourished me since childhood, my love for animals. Returning to Vance Global Holdings, I restructured the entire family empire. Not to prove anything to the world, but to prove to myself that some wounds only heal when you turn pain into kindness. I established a veterinary relief fund for rescue shelters all along the West Coast, from Sacramento to Portland, from San Jose to Tacoma. Every time I saw an animal healed, adopted, or running freely in the yard of its new home, I felt like I too was part of that journey. A creature once abandoned, now finding its way back home. Through all those months, Ethan was there, quiet as a steady line in the wind. He never pried into my past, never asked questions that would force me to relive what I wished to forget. He simply stayed. In boardroom meetings, on field trips to the rescue fund sites, in late evenings when I sat buried in paperwork and he brewed me tea. Some things don't need to be said. His steady presence reminded me, not everyone is here to hurt you. The media began calling me by a nickname that made me laugh the first time I heard it. The quiet billionaire. The woman who appeared rarely, spoke little, but everything she touched changed. They didn't know that silence was the only armor I chose to keep. A year passed. Magnus vanished from my life like a leaf blown off a cliff. No one knew where he went, and no one cared to find out. Jennifer, too, disappeared. No more live streams, no more cries for sympathy, no glittering illusions. She chose silence, and I hoped, for once, that it was the right thing she did for herself. As for me. After that long year, I stood at the glass tower of Vance Global Holdings, looking down at the crisscrossing streets of San Francisco, and realized I had finally arrived where I belonged. I no longer looked back and asked, why? Everything I lost, I would let it stay quietly in the past. I had just turned 36, and at this morning's internal ceremony, Jonathan officially handed over the reins of the $25 billion empire to me. He called it retirement, but I knew he would still be watching over every step I took, just as he had all year. As I placed my hand on the polished walnut table in the grand boardroom, the morning sunlight reflected off the glass, showing me not as the woman once pushed from a car in a snowstorm, but as the head of a global corporation, the woman California media now called, somewhat grandly, San Francisco's newest young billionaire. The decisions I made over the past year, restructuring the flagship investment fund, reviving 3 green tech projects, and building a rescue fund network for veterinary care, had made enough waves that financial publications began calling me the fresh breeze of West Coast finance. But what moved me most wasn't the headlines or the numbers. It was the moment Jonathan stood beside me, his hand gently resting on my shoulder, his voice deep and warm like he was speaking to the little granddaughter from years ago. You've become stronger than I ever hoped. I turned to look at him, and in his eyes, I saw a pride so profound that for the first time in years, I felt I had truly completed the journey. Not to escape someone, but to become myself. If Adeline's journey made you feel even a little stronger, or simply reminded you that you are not alone in the path to reclaim your worth, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with a woman you love. Who knows, it might touch her heart the way it touched yours. Wishing you a truly peaceful day.